Good morning, Beaumont. Glad to be with you guys today. It's time for a sip of a delicious beverage. Oh, yeah, there we are. That golden elixir of life. Anyway, executive actions performed by the Biden White House staff and signed by the Autopen are null and void. This is according to the House Oversight Committee on Tuesday. They published their final report of its investigation into the Biden administration's use of the Autopen, concluding that at least some of the president's orders were invalid and calling on the Justice Department to investigate. Earlier this year, the House Oversight Committee launched a probe into the alleged use of the Autopen to sign pardons and other presidential orders. There were some 8,000 pardons that were signed by the Autopen. And if you added up the total amount, even working 24/7, there's no way that Joe Biden could have done all of those. So earlier this year, they launched this probe and they said, something looks a little hinky here. Representative James Comer from Kentucky came to suspect that what he and his colleagues had uncovered could be used as evidence to overturn some of those executive actions because these senior staff failed to prove that the president knew what he was signing. Well, of course, as you know, toward the end of his presidency, he had a little trouble telling the difference between tapioca and oatmeal, let alone what he may have been signing. The Autopen presidency is going to go down as one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history, but it won't necessarily be remembered that way because, one thing, the Democrats own the media. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSDNC, NPR, and PBS, and to a lesser degree, even Fox News, have been nothing more than propaganda arms for the Democrat Party. And that's all they do, is they do propaganda for the Democrat Party. This is completely unacceptable, and that's why nobody's really going to hear about this. You heard about Watergate, and that was because the Democrats owned the media back then, and it was on every news broadcast, sun up to sundown, every day of the week. You won't hear about any of this because those same Democrats that ran the networks back then are still running the networks today, and they will not report on anything that might affect their favorite selected president who was not democratically elected at all. The executive actions performed by the Biden White House staff and signed by the Autopen are null and void, and we are calling on the U.S. Department of Justice to conduct a thorough review of these executive actions and to scrutinize key Biden aides who took the Fifth Amendment to hide their participation in this cover-up. We have provided Americans with transparency about the Biden Autopen presidency. Now there must be accountability. Comer and his oversight committee conducted 14 depositions, transcribed interviews with senior Biden White House staff, including 2 chiefs of staff, his personal physician, and senior advisors. The former president's personal physician and First Lady Jill Biden, chief of staff, each invoked their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when they were questioned by the House Oversight Committee. The Oversight Committee concluded that senior Biden White House staff illegally exercised the president's authority on his behalf by directing the use of the Autopen, but not consulting the actual president about these things. The committee's investigation turned up alarming deficiencies in the documentation and chain of custody for key presidential decisions. In some cases, President Biden was only said to have approved certain actions verbally and without any clear record of the decision being memorialized by his staff. This is amazing. For example, Neera Tanden, we talked about her on this show. She served as senior advisor and staff secretary during Biden's term, and she testified before the committee that she had virtually no interaction with the president at all, despite the fact that it was her responsibility to record presidential decisions and actions. As staff secretary, Neera Tanden was responsible for managing the decision materials and sending them to the Oval Office operations section. However, Tanden said that she only saw the president about every 6 to 8 weeks, and usually that was when he was being walked from one room to another. Tanden also admitted to the committee, despite being in charge of directing the use of the Autopen, she was given little insight into how those acts were being approved, and she said she did not know who in Biden's inner circle was ultimately approving these actions. The committee also argues that the lack of uniform procedure for presidential approval and Autopen use made the system ripe for exploitation. For example, Biden's final chief of staff, Jeff Zients, told the Oversight Committee that he had never seen any kind of a memo outlining how the decisions would be made and when the Autopen could be used. Another Biden chief of staff, Ron Klain, told the committee that it was an established process for the president to sign decision materials, but that the process was not always followed. Sometimes a simple verbal approval with no attendant record was sufficient. Zients also told the committee that the procedure was not a precise system and that there were verbal authorizations for the president's decision that would occur on occasion, like, "Would you like to have cinnamon on your oatmeal, Mr. President? Can you sign these 22 pardons?" That's kind of how it worked. Very sad, but true. The congressional probe's findings matched closely with a review from the Trump White House of its predecessor's Autopen use. The review found scant contemporaneous evidence that Biden actually attended 4 key clemency meetings in the waning months of his term and turned up no record on the president's briefing books announcing these pardons, commutations, or clemency at any time. And this was reported in Just the News. There were 4 meetings between December 2024 and January 2025, during which President Biden was said to have given verbal approval for his far-ranging clemency actions. This included commutations for CARES Act home confinement recipients, federal death row inmates, and crack powder sentencing disparities, as well as the Biden family pardons. I guess that includes the crack powder that Hunter left in the White House, but who knows? Despite the retroactive emails detailing Biden's presence at these 4 meetings, which allegedly took place on December 5th, December 11th, January 11th, and January the 19th, the National Archives says it possesses no contemporaneous staff notes from any of these meeting attendees that would confirm or even indicate that the president was actually present at the meetings or gave any sort of verbal approval for these clemency acts, probably because it never happened. Biden has defended the use of the Autopen since leaving office, or whoever's wearing the Joe Biden suit anyway. Anytime you see Joe Biden from now on, there should be a DNA test to confirm who he really is. Anyway, he told the New York Times in an interview in July that he made every decision. He also shed light on how he and his aides decided on pardons at the close of his administration and how he approved them, all 8,000 of those death row inmates. The former president insisted he made every decision when it came to those pardons. However, he noted that in some cases, like Biden's categorical pardons, his aides did not, of course, actually read the names of the people he was pardoning. The paper, mainly because it would have taken hours. The paper also reported that Biden did not individually approve each name for categorical pardons that applied to large numbers of people. He and his aides have confirmed that, citing administration sources. However, the Oversight Committee believes that in the absence of evidence showing that President Biden indeed took particular executive action, the committee deems those actions taken through the use of the Autopen as null and void. The final report calls on the Trump Justice Department to review the former president's alleged pardons and executive actions. The validity of the executive actions allegedly approved and signed by the Autopen by President Biden must be reviewed to determine whether legal action is necessary to ameliorate the consequences of any illegitimate pardons granted or executive actions implemented through the Biden Autopen presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said earlier, this is the biggest scandal in American politics in history. But it won't be reported because the Democrats own the news media, except for Freedom 1300 AM right here in Beaumont. And I want to thank Stephen Richards over at Just the News for that insightful article. Now this. Finally, let me say this. The stock market on Monday closed at record highs, one day after the Trump administration announced that the United States and China have agreed to a substantial framework in trade talks. Framework comes as Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump are set to meet in South Korea on Thursday. So this is good news. Said, I think we've reached a substantial framework for the two leaders, and they're going to meet next Thursday, said Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The president has given me maximum leverage when he threatened 100% tariffs if China imposed their rare earth global export controls, so I think we have averted that. Bessent also said there's potential deal on U.S. soybeans after China stopped purchasing them amid the ongoing trade war. China is the largest purchaser of U.S. soybeans, buying more than 50% of American exports in 2023 and 2024. Well, this is good news. We need China to have a lot of soy boys. I believe that when the announcement with the deal with China is made public, our soybean farmers are going to be very happy with what's going on both this season and for the coming seasons. So this is good news. Once again, we've been under attack by China for a very long time. They have been trying to destroy us with unfair trade policies, and they've been using their ill-gotten gains to try to build a navy that might be able to compete with the United States. And I worry about China in this respect. They do have more than a 200 million man army. That's compared to our roughly 1.5 million man army. The only advantage we have is they have no capability to transport that army en masse, and the oceans that separate us still protect us from the giant that is China, a godless society. So we'll see what happens with that. Finally, let me say this. The Schumer shutdown continues, and once again, the Democrats are holding the entire world hostage. They're preventing very needy families from getting their food benefits, and they're doing this simply because they want illegal aliens included in health care and food benefits. That's the only reason they're doing it. And the reason why they want to do that is because they believe that illegal aliens being able to vote are the only way that they're going to remain in power. And without that capability, they can't stay in power. And you know what? They're right, because no real American at this point is going to ever vote Democrat again. And that's why I foresee that the Democrats will not only lose power in the Senate and in the House, but there will not be any Democrats elected to national office for at least 20 years.
You have a choice, and you chose Freedom 1300.